Bonjour, je suis Stéphane Aquin, directeur général du Musée des Beaux-Arts de Montréal. Il me fait un grand plaisir ce soir de vous inviter au vernissage virtuel de l'exposition L'univers de Yousuf Karsh, l'essence du sujet. Yousuf Karsh, comme plusieurs d'entre vous le savent, est ce grand photographe arméno-canadien qui fut un des grands portraitistes du XXe siècle. Grâce à la générosité exceptionnelle de l'estate de Yousuf Karsh et d'Estrelita Karsh, sa veuve, il nous a été fait don de 111 œuvres de l'artiste. Alors ces œuvres, plusieurs d'entre elles rarissimes, de très grand format, comme vous allez le constater, ont toutes été tirées par l'artiste lui-même. Je vais souligner l'importance de ce don qui transforme réellement la collection du Musée des Beaux-Arts durablement. Avant de passer la parole à Hilliard Goldfarb, conservateur senior de la collection des Maîtres anciens et grand amateur de photographie et commissaire de cette exposition, j'aimerais remercier un autre très grand amateur de photographie, le mécène de cette exposition, Michel Faneuf. J'aimerais aussi remercier notre commanditaire officiel, Peinture de Nalte, ainsi que nos partenaires publics, le Conseil des Arts du Canada, le ministère de la Culture et des Communications du Québec et le Conseil des Arts de Montréal. Je vous souhaite donc tous une très belle soirée et une très belle découverte de l'univers de Yousuf Karsh.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Stéphane, and thank you all for being here with us today. Today, I have the immense pleasure of sitting down with Estrelita Karsh, who is Yousuf Karsh's wife. Hilliard, my dear colleague, who is the curator of the exhibition, who's done an absolutely wonderful job, as you will see, will talk to us about the images themselves in just a minute and will give us a tour of the exhibition. But before that happens, I feel so lucky today to have a moment to talk with you, Estrelita, about your life with Yousuf, about your own work, and about your lives together. So thank you so much for your time.
Great pleasure.
So I think I'll start by asking the very basic question. How did you and Yousuf Karsh meet?
We met in the strangest of ways. He had come to Chicago to photograph my boss, and it never happened. My boss was Dr. Walter C. Alvarez, formerly head of medicine at the Mayo Clinic, and I was his editor. And the two lovely people who owned medical magazines had decided that the loveliest gift they could give to dear Dr. Alvarez would be a portrait by Karsh. And so he was asked. His assistant arrived with 200 pounds of equipment. You know, this was not selfie days. This was 200 pounds of real equipment that had to be done in his own studio. And everything was running beautifully until Yousuf arrived. And then he got a terrible, terrible news that his dear wife was dying and he must rush home. She had had breast cancer, and this was a very difficult period. He left immediately. Everything was canceled. He was in great grief, of course, and he went to Europe and went to Morocco and did films with Cornell Wilde, who was an actor in that late 50s period. And I did not see him for almost a year and a half.
Interesting.
Never met him. I continued my work with Dr. Alvarez as his editor, helping him with his syndicated medical column and doing things in medical history in which I'd become interested. And then finally the day arrived and I did not see him because I had the flu, was recovering from it. He photographed Dr. Alvarez, and then came a phone call at about 5:30 in his usual childlike, wonderful, very persuasive manner. Come on, childie, come on down and meet Karsh. And this was in Chicago at one of the hotels across the street from each other, done in 18th century way. And I said, no, I really, I mean, I was very impressed by Mr. Karsh, but I mean, I really didn't feel like going out. And he persuaded me. Well, I wasn't. I was at the end of it, and he
At
knew
the
it.
end, okay, recovery.
He never would have asked me to do it. And come on, Childie, come on, Childie. Well, very well. Reluctantly, I got dressed and went to the Ambassador East, across the street from the Ambassador West, two hotels facing each other. And I met him, and we spoke, and it was a very formal meeting, and no bells rang, unfortunately. And however, I did notice what I call the yearning in his eyes, and that sort of interested me. Well, goodbyes were said, and I thought, well, what a nice thing to meet such a lovely person. And as I say, in terms of being impressed, well, you know, Nobelists ran in and out of our office. So, I mean, yes, he was famous, but so what? I mean,
Tough lady to impress.
He made no effort to impress. He was the same from the day I met him until many, many years later. He was just himself all the time, which was a very interesting.
It's a wonderful quality. It's something that not everyone has. Sometimes being oneself is easier said than done.
No, he was the same with everyone, whether it was a waiter or a priest or a queen or a king or someone in the theater or an author or just a nice human being who wanted to be photographed. And so I was very happy to have met him. The photographs were tender and beautiful, as Dr. Alvarez. And then came a call from Ottawa, from the and it was his secretary, who was a British war bride. And Ottawa's very English anyway, as you know. And came the call, Mr. Karsh is wondering, she said, whether you would be interested in seeing the symphony with him on Thursday in Chicago. And I thought about it, and I had tickets every week, which was a great, great thing for me because I had worked my way through college and I had always longed to get tickets to the symphony. And finally, I was in a position to buy tickets and take a taxi to the and so I said, quite truthfully, thank you, but I saw it. I saw it Tuesday night.
Good for you. Hard to get.
No, that's what all my girlfriends thought. They said, Estrelita, are you crazy? I said, no, I saw it. I really never believed in that kind of thing. And I thought, you know, if that's the way to get a man and he's stupid, I don't want it, you know, but
Good point.
At any rate, I was honest and I said no. 3 weeks later came another call from Ottawa and the British war bride. Mr. Karsh is wondering whether there is some theater that you have not seen. And if he thought that, you know, he was, and I quite truthfully said, yes, there is. And I don't even remember what we saw that night, but I do know that a year and a half later, we were married.
A beautiful story.
It was an inevitability for some strange reason.
Well, it seems as though while you might have been slower to catch on, he certainly had a certain something for you after your first real meeting where you got to speak with one another.
Yes. The nice thing is that we were both ourselves. I was less because I didn't feel that well, and I was very interested in him, and I thought he was a thoughtful and kind man. That was my initial impression, which never changed throughout our 42-year marriage.
I wanted to return a little bit to the medical context because it's perhaps not something everyone knows, but you, Estrelita, are a very accomplished medical historian, and writer as well. And I know that Yousuf had also an interest in medical sciences, in doctors. He wanted to be a doctor.
Probably because of the massacres in which he had been involved as a young person in
Armenia.
in Armenia, well, Turkey and Armenia.
Yes, then Turkey, yes, Ottoman
and
Empire,
then, of course, in Aleppo, where the family sought refuge.
Right.
So in fact, it turned out that many of our friends were doctors besides others. And the theater, we both loved the theater. And it was in the theater that Yousuf really learned about lighting.
That's right. That's right. And
that was in Ottawa. And
you can see in the images in the exhibition the incredible technical mastery that he had of light. And I was very interested to learn from you and other sources just how much the theatrical lighting helped him hone his craft.
Well, you see, when he came to Canada, as I said, as everyone knows by now, probably at the age of 15, alone, after 29 days in steerage, and he emerged from the boat at the port of Halifax alone to be greeted by his uncle. His uncle was the only member of his family who had made it across the pond. He was a son of he was a brother to his mother. He was his uncle, and he was a photographer, and he was practicing in Quebec. And he met Yousuf. Imagine, the kid had never seen snow. He was 15 years old. He remembered, he told me, the bells tinkling because it was New Year's. And he said it was the loveliest chimes he had ever heard. But of course, when they tried to put him in school, where do you put a young man who was fluent in French, unknown to the language in English, and said he arrived only armed with good manners, so armed with good manners, they put him in school. And where did they put him? They put him in the 3rd or 4th grade, a big adolescent boy.
Really?
With the babies, with the young kids.
Wow.
And he was mortified beyond belief.
Sure.
And 2 little girls, the Bradley sisters, the daughters of the mayor of Sherbrooke, I believe, they must have taken pity on him. It must have been a pathetic sight. And so they played marbles with him. They made sure that he won.
Amazing. That is so sweet.
It's such
That's a great story.
Sweet. And he said that was the day my love affair with Canada began. It was so charming.
That's a beautiful story. You can see that relationship of trust that he cultivated because you see that people let their guard down in the photographs. And one of the things I wanted to ask you, because there are a few photographs of you, beautiful photographs, I should say, in the exhibition.
Long time ago.
Well, I'd like to ask you what it was like for you to sit for your husband.
I never sat.
Oh, explain.
Okay. Well, the first one, the one you're using for your show, was
as a title wall. Beautiful photograph.
I can't tell you how that made me feel. I mean, I was the girl. I was the bookworm. I was the girl that, that just wanted to go to school and learn and just to be, it amazed me. It really did. And
well, we wanted to make that tribute to you and to this beautiful gift that you and the estate have given us with this incredible donation. And it's interesting to hear you describe yourself as a bookworm. And I know, as I mentioned, you're such an accomplished scholar and writer yourself. But
He loved it. He was very, very encouraging about that. And
about your work.
Yes, and shared it with me. And even the Britannica stuff that I did, the Encyclopedia Britannica on, the Britannica had then you bought books, you bought the whole set of the Britannica, and that was your go-to book when you wanted to learn about the world. And every year they had a medical annual, beautifully done, just like the regular series. And the first part was medical history for the enlightened, intelligent layman. And the second part were updates on medicine from famous doctors who were head of their specialties. And so he did that, and I lectured occasionally.
It's wonderful that he supported you in that way, and that you had your own independent life. And although you describe yourself as a bookworm, I would just say to those of you who are going to see this wonderful exhibition as soon as it opens, we also chose that image of you as a title wall because it shows your strength and independence, not to mention incredible beauty. I say not just to be flattering, but it's very true, and he captures your strength and kindness in the images that he took of you. So although you might not have been physically sitting, I'm curious to know.
Oh, there were momentary sittings.
Sittings.
The first one I don't even remember when he
really fascinating.
That was the first one. The one with where I'm looking down in a caftan.
Yes.
That was my 50th birthday photograph.
You're kidding. Wow.
I was 50 then, a long time ago.
You looked 20 then. I can't believe you were 50 then. That's amazing.
Well, now I'm 90. I'm 91. So it was quite astonishing. There I was, all dressed up in my caftan to go to a birthday dinner. And he said, "Just a minute." And I said, "Yes." And I guess I must have looked down, and that was it. That was the photograph.
It's an amazing image.
Did I sit for him? No. But of course, I mean, I sat for him my whole life, basically. Right. He knew me pretty well.
He knew already.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Now, I'll ask you, just in closing, is there because you witnessed your husband photograph so much, you of course know all the entire body of work so well. Do you have a favorite image in the entire corpus? Sorry?
Favorites with a
favorites. So you have a few favorites. Would you share with us a few of your favorite images in the corpus?
Well, one is George Bernard Shaw, because it reminds me of a print. Of a steel print, and it captured so rich, and the whole encounter with Shaw was fraught with dynamism back and forth, and you could see that. It's a very droll photograph, and I love that picture. Remembering, yes.
When you say that it was fraught with dynamism, that is because they had a kind of
the way Shaw greeted him, and he called her his appallingly efficient secretary, who met him, and yes, Shaw, yes.
Shaw is definitely high ranking up there.
Very high, yes. I've always loved, maybe because it reminded me of his work and the 20th century and whatever. I mean.
Well, listen, thank you so much, Estrelita, for sharing that, for sharing your stories. You have so many wonderful stories. I could talk to you all afternoon, but I know we have a limited time, unfortunately. I want to say a huge thank you again to you for this wonderful gift of 111 images, which will have a major impact on the collection of the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts. And also just thank you for your time, your intelligence, your generosity, and all of your support of this exhibition. Thank you.
Pleasure to talk to you, and I'm happy to share it with Montreal, so it's a homecoming for Yousuf, and it means a great deal to me. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I'll turn it to Hilliard. Thank you.
Of course.
Hello, my name is Hilliard Goldfarb. Welcome to this wonderful, remarkable exhibition on the work of Joseph Karsh, which is made possible through the extraordinary generosity of Estrelita Karsh, his widow, and the Karsh estate. We are featuring no less than 112 photographs, 111 of them given by Estrelita Karsh and the estate, and one, the 112th, which Yousuf Karsh personally gave to the museum back in 1992. This exhibition respects Karsh as the greatest portrait photographer of the 20th century, which the subject matter reveals in terms of the esteem in which he was held around the world, but also Karsh, the artist. So therefore, the exhibition is organized chronologically so we can see his development as an individual, stylistically, as I say, but also the world as it changed and altered from the 1930s through 1990. This life of Yousuf Karsh is intimately tied to the history of Canada. He was born in 1908 in the Ottoman Empire of Armenian extraction, and having survived the genocide, in 1922 the family was allowed to flee with only the clothes on their back. Arriving in Aleppo, Syria, they saved up their money and sent the young Yousuf by ship to Halifax, where his uncle Nagash was awaiting him, who lived in Sherbrooke, Quebec. He disembarked on New Year's Day, 1924, in the midst of a snowstorm, the first snow he had ever seen in his life, and was taken back to Quebec, where his uncle was a photographer. As a gift to him, he gave the young Yousuf a Brownie camera. And he took some photographs, and one was taken by a schoolmate, sent to a competition, and he was awarded the $50 prize, which he sent the proceeds to his family still in Syria. But his uncle now recognized his talents. And in 1928, he arranged for him to be trained by John Garrow, an Armenian American, who was a major portrait photographer in Boston. And it was from John Garrow, with whom he worked between 1928 and 1930, that he really learned the techniques, lighting, work in the darkroom, and also, as he profoundly was appreciative in later years, gained an interest in going to the Museum of Fine Arts, in opera and symphony, in meeting politicians and figures in arts and letters that impacted the rest of his life. So let's take a fast look through the first gallery, which presents Karsh's work between 1931 and 1958, those remarkable early years of international renown. Now let's look at some of his photographs. In 1931, he does a photograph of John Garrow himself, and he returns to Canada, moving to Ottawa, where he could have a more interesting, he felt, international clientele. And he photographs, for example, Ruth Draper, but you could still see the influence of photography of a generation earlier in the soft focus and gentle idealization of the figure type. He experiments in the early 30s, and you have here examples of the influence of expressionism, of surrealism, as you can see in this image of Elixir. And he joins the theater company, the Ottawa Little Theater, where he meets the son of the Governor General, Lord Bessborough. He also meets his future wife, Solange, and through Bessborough's parents, he gets to take an official photograph, which gets wide distribution. And ultimately, through the Governor Generals, he meets Mackenzie King. And we have an image of Mackenzie King here. And Mackenzie King develops an enduring friendship with Yousuf Karsh. And thanks to King, he gets to photograph Franklin Roosevelt and other figures. But the big moment that totally changed his career was in 1941, in the midst of World War II, when Winston Churchill visited Ottawa. Now, what I haven't explained to you is that you're getting a behind-the-scenes view of this exhibition before we've even completed all the details of lighting or put up the text labels. The text labels in this exhibition are particularly important, almost uniquely so, because what I have done is given you only the citations from Karsh himself remembering his sittings and the sitters. So it's as if you can hear him speak in your ear as you're looking at the image. It's like speak memory addressed to Karsh, and he tells you about that moment when he did the photograph and his reaction to the person he was photographing. In 1941, Winston Churchill, as I say, comes to Ottawa, and Mackenzie King arranges with Karsh to set up in the speaker's office to photograph Winston Churchill. The problem was he hadn't informed Winston Churchill he was going to do that. So Winston Churchill comes into the speaker's room and he finds Karsh set up to do a photograph. He was really upset, but ultimately agreed, puffing away on his cigar. Karsh finished setting up, asked him if he'd remove his cigar, and he said no. And he then acted as though he's doing a final focus, raced up to Churchill, pulled the cigar out of his mouth, and took the photograph. The photograph became an iconic image of the Prime Minister during the travail of World War II, and I might add, Churchill really liked it and changed his mind completely about him, and he photographed him again later in his career. So this image went round the world and completely altered his life. As we will see by the mid and later 40s, he's already photographing everyone from going to London to photograph King George to leading figures in the United States and later in Europe, all on the basis of this remarkable photograph. Every photograph in this exhibition is original and vintage, while the negatives were left to the Canadian National Archives. When he closed his studio in Ottawa in 1993, no positive prints can be made from those negatives. So therefore, you are looking at the works that Karsh himself not only photographed, but oversaw the development of. Let's take a look at some other photographs in this first room that celebrates his production between 1931 and 1958. Eleanor Roosevelt was, of course, an extraordinary American, a political activist, the wife of Franklin D. Roosevelt, the author of the Charter of Human Rights for the United Nations. She had a remarkable influence on the world of her time. There's a story that Karsh tells about Eleanor Roosevelt that I would like to share with you that you'll be able to read in the exhibition. He writes, "We had a letter from Vietnam from an American soldier asking if he could buy a photograph of Eleanor Roosevelt. We sent one with our compliments, and I asked why a young soldier should be so interested. He replied that he was not young, but a veteran, and how wonderful Eleanor Roosevelt was in paying him a visit in the hospital in the South Pacific during the war, World War II. He wrote, as she entered, we thought her to be the homeliest woman we had ever seen. But by her sympathy, her consolation, and her assurance that she herself would telephone our mothers, our fathers, our sweethearts, when she took her leave, we thought her to be among the most beautiful women ever." The range of subjects addressed by Yousuf Karsh is remarkable. They include civil rights figures, politicians, as I've noted before, scientists, movie actors and actresses, the figures from all ranges of professions, including, as he was very proud of, presenting Canadians in their everyday work. And we'll see this throughout the exhibition. But I want to start with two remarkable American civil rights figures now. Paul Robeson, photographed at the beginning of the 1940s, great actor, athlete, and profoundly renowned bass singer, but also a very active civil rights leader, and the remarkable Marian Anderson. I remind you that when you see the show, the text from Yousuf Karsh will be on the wall, so you can read what he was saying and thinking at the time that this was created. Marian Anderson was a great contralto singer. She was born in Philadelphia and was prohibited from studying at the Curtis Institute of Music because of her race. She took training in Europe under sponsorship And when Toscanini, the great conductor, heard her, he called her the voice of the century. She had developed a tremendous international career, but when she toured the United States, she had to perform to segregated audiences. She was invited to perform in Washington, and the only hall that could hold her, the audience because of her renown was a hall owned by the Daughters of the American Revolution. They refused to desegregate the theater. So Eleanor Roosevelt intervened. And thanks to her and Franklin Roosevelt, she was allowed to perform on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. 75,000 people attended, and it was broadcast live in the summer of 1939. This was an amazing moment in civil rights in the United States. As you move through the 1940s, you of course have Dwight David Eisenhower right after the war, still in uniform, but we also have images of stars, because in 1946, Life magazine invited Karsh to do photographs of leading Hollywood movie stars for their magazine. And among them, I'm delighted to say that we have both Humphrey Bogart and Ingrid Bergman in 1946, just 3 years after making what is arguably the greatest romantic film ever produced, Casablanca. We also include images of Helen Keller, who shortly after her birth came down with a high fever and was left blind and deaf. And yet, extraordinarily, as is told in the movie The Miracle Worker, was able to find a way through touch to communicate to the world to such an extent she graduated from Radcliffe College at Harvard and had a powerful following as a writer and philanthropist in her own right. Thomas Collins, the Canadian doctor. And of course, from 1948, Albert Einstein. The Canadian projects I mentioned. I should note that thanks to a new legislation, in January 1947, Karsh became one of the first 10 naturalized Canadians in the country, because before that, you had to be naturalized as a Briton. But now he could naturalize himself as a Canadian and took the immediate initiative to place himself in the first to be so promoted, and then began bringing his family from Syria. And in 1950s, he started working on projects from Atlas Steel, from Ford Canada, and as we'll see in the next room, for Maclean's magazine, featuring Canadians at work. And here you have an image from Atlas Steel, an image from the Ford plant in Ontario, and now we're going to move into the 1950s. There are no less than 30 Canadian subjects among the 112 images. And Karsh did, as I pointed out a moment ago, several series of Canadians of which he was enormously proud. In this room, covering the period from 1952 to 1958, we have the images he did for Maclean's magazine. And they range from a fisherman in his traditional activities, mending a net in the Maritimes, to Alberta and the Calgary Stampede, to the broad plains and fields. He was always passionate in his love for music, and there are many musicians and composers included in this exhibition. It was a great joy for me that we could combine in the donation and exhibition images of Pablo Casals and Glenn Gould, done in the 1950s. The Casals image is particularly touching to me because it shows this great cellist who discovered the Bach cello suites and first performed them publicly and first recorded them, lost in his world of music in a Romanesque chapel in France. And even without seeing Casals' face, through the genius of Karsh's understanding of gradation of tone and lighting in his black and white photographs, we can sense the very private world that the artist has entered into. Similarly, he chooses to photograph Gould as he is in the midst of playing himself. And this brings me to one of the most extraordinary images I found in the exhibition, which is on the cover of the catalog for the exhibition, of his encounter with Albert Schweitzer in 1954. Yousuf Karsh wrote the following: "When there is a respite of a few minutes waiting or to change films, etc., he went back to his writing, and he did all his writing by hand and with full concentration, as if there were nothing else around him. And when he was called to come, he came with equal attention devoted to the photographs. And towards the end of the 2 days, he wanted to play the organ for us at the church right opposite his home. I thought that was typical of the very man himself, who could have been a great musician, a great organist, fine writer, good man of medicine, and with all this, he left to help the lepers in the Congo, in French Equatorial Africa, significant of the largesse of the nature of this man. Which, I asked that humanitarian and Nobel Peace Prize winner, is the greatest of the 10 commandments? Christ gave only one commandment, replied Schweitzer, and that was love. Among other figures featured in this period of the 1950s are these historic images, these icons of Georgia O'Keeffe, done at her home in New Mexico, and of the young Jacqueline Kennedy in 1957, at the time that she married Senator John Kennedy. Centered in this gallery, anchoring it, are two very different photographs. One of the great author Ernest Hemingway, done in 1957 towards the end of his career in Cuba. And the other image, which needs little explanation, is of the young Brigitte Bardot, shortly after she made the film And God Made Woman. Our final gallery brings us to the later career of Yousuf Karsh between 1962 and 1990. In 1960, Yousuf Karsh's wife Solange died. And in 1961, he traveled to Chicago to photograph a doctor there. However, this trip afforded him the occasion to meet Estrelita Nachbar, who became his second wife, his companion, his organizer, his editor, his everything for the rest of his life. And here we have a photograph taken of her in 1963. Estrelita is in her own right a remarkable medical historian, author, and editor. He writes of her and their meeting, "As destiny would have it, she was fascinating to me from our first meeting. I felt her to have the most penetrating and liquidy eyes. I associate with her eyes tremendous depth, and that depth was all knowledge and humor. With her editorial ability, Estrelita helped me to formulate my thoughts. On all our travels over the years, whether to Zululand, to Japan, to Russia, to Finland, to Scandinavia, to Egypt, we have pursued our joint interests in archaeology, in art, in medicine. She has continued to write articles on medical history. Her carefully concealed scholarship transforms research in old tomes into engaging and modern social history." At over 90, Estrelita continues to guide the estate of Yousuf Karsh and has been a profound benefactor represented in this exhibition. In perusing the images of Yousuf Karsh from the 1960s to 1990, we encounter yet another extraordinary range of personalities and careers. From Mies van der Rohe to Nikita Khrushchev, who in 1963, Karsh saw approaching him from a distance And being a rather diminutive figure, he had the idea, even though it was April at this point, to have him enrobed in the largest fur coat possible. And this was done. Nikita Khrushchev agreed to it, found it humorous. And Nina, his wife, also laughed, remembering that the coat had been made in preparation for Prime Minister Macmillan, who had visited Russia and wanted to go tobogganing, so that if he slipped off the toboggan, he wouldn't be injured. So we have this remarkable image of Khrushchev in fur. The same year, he did these photographs in South Africa. As we round the corner, you can see a range of Canadian and American figures. These include Edward Steichen, Harold Town, the great Inuit artist Kanojwak, the inimitable Andy Warhol. And in 1970, at the peak of his talents as a pugilist, of course, Muhammad Ali. And it's given Karsh's sensibility remarkable in its firm aggressiveness to capture the personality as he saw it at that time of Muhammad Ali. Most of Karsh's photography seeks to express the inner life and the spirituality of individuals. And he also gives us this wonderful photograph of the actual fist of Muhammad Ali. And I couldn't resist the opportunity, especially as both photographs were taken the same year, of juxtaposing Rudolf Nureyev with our own great Karen Kane. Isaac Bashevis Singer, Robertson Davies, Benazir Bhutto, who was Prime Minister of Pakistan in her era. I want to close on two figures who altered the history of the 20th century in very distinctive ways. Of course, you'll recognize that this is Mother Teresa. Facing her, we have this image of Nelson Mandela and a wonderful story about how the picture was taken. Mandela in 1990 had only recently been freed from prison and was touring various capitals in the world to solicit support and help for a new South Africa. And he arrived in Ottawa after a long flight, not used to the public attention and press attention he was getting, and quite exhausted. Karsh recognized that, so he thought that the best thing he could do is tell him an amusing story that he could appreciate. And he writes, "We began, but he still seemed a bit overwhelmed, so we paused, and I told him about the time I photographed Pope John the 23rd. I asked the pontiff, how many people work in the Vatican? The Pope smiled and replied, about half. Mandela looked a little blank, and suddenly he got the joke, slapped the table, and roared with laughter, getting not only the humor, but also the relevance to his own situation. And everything about the sitting changed." This has been a short overview of this exhibition. Please come. Discover the artistry of Yousuf Karsh. Discover the essence of his subjects. And read his own relationship to them and to the sittings. I think you will find it an unforgettable experience that will endure with you for many years to come.
Merci à vous tous d'avoir été avec nous ce soir. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here with us tonight on this very special occasion to mark the opening of this truly wonderful exhibition. I want to say a very special thanks to Estrelita Karsh for her wonderful support throughout this entire process, and of course to Hilliard Goldfarb, who is the curator of the exhibition, who's done an absolutely Wonderful job. We cannot wait for you to see this exhibition in person as of tomorrow. Welcome, come, bring your family, bring your friends. We're excited to see you.